She had sold everything she owned to get here. Every piece of jewelry her mother left her, every book she had ever loved, every scrap of dignity she had left after 2 years of grief and debt. Annabelle Porter had come to Colorado with one single purpose: to marry a man she had never met. But the moment she stepped off that train, the man waiting for her looked her straight in the eyes and said 4 words that shattered everything she had planned. "He doesn't want you." If you're new here, please subscribe to our channel and follow Annabelle's story all the way to the end. And drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. They called her a mail-order bride, but the cowboy knew she was his destiny from the start. The train had been moving for 3 days. 3 days of hard wooden seats, coal smoke seeping through the windows, and the constant clatter of iron wheels grinding against iron rails. Annabelle Porter had spent most of those 3 days with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the passing landscape, telling herself the same thing over and over again. The way a person recites a prayer they're not sure they believe anymore. This is the right decision. This is the only decision. She was 28 years old. She had been a widow for 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She had counted every single one of them. Her husband, Thomas, had been a good man, a careful man, and yet somehow his careful life had left behind a mountain of debt she hadn't known existed until the lawyers showed up at her door the week after the funeral. The house was gone within 6 months. The furniture went next. She had moved into a boarding house on the edge of Boston, taken in sewing work, and tried to convince herself that a woman of her education and her capabilities could find a way forward on her own. She couldn't. Not in Boston, not in 1878. When she had found the advertisement tucked inside the back pages of a women's periodical her friend Cecilia had left behind, she had laughed. Actually, laughed. A short, bitter sound that surprised even herself. Mail-order brides were for desperate women, she had told herself. Women with no other options. It had taken her exactly 3 more months to admit that she was one of those women. The advertisement had been written in plain, straightforward language. Gerald Harrington, landowner, Silver Creek, Colorado. 34 years old. Successful cattle operation. Seeking an educated, capable woman of good character for the purpose of marriage. No prior acquaintance necessary. Travel expenses provided. She had written back. He had written back. 4 letters total spaced 6 weeks apart. He was polite, formal. He mentioned the ranch, the land, the need for a practical partnership. He never once mentioned love, and neither did she. That had felt honest to Annabelle, like a contract she could understand. She had packed 2 trunks, sold everything else, and boarded the train. Now the train was slowing, the brakes crying against the rails, and out the window Annabelle could see the rooftops of Silver Creek taking shape through the dust. Small, rough. Nothing like Boston. Nothing like anywhere she had ever been. She straightened her back, fixed the pin in her hat, and reminded herself that she had survived worse than this. She had not yet met the man who would make her wonder if that was actually true. The platform was crowded with the usual noise of a train arrival. Men unloading freight, women waiting for parcels, children running between legs. Annabelle stepped down from the car with her traveling bag in one hand and her chin level and looked for Gerald Harrington. She had no photograph of him. He had not sent one, and she had not asked. She scanned the faces on the platform, looking for a man who looked like he might be expecting someone. She found him almost immediately. He was standing apart from the crowd, arms crossed, watching the train with a businesslike expression. Medium height, fair-haired, probably 35. He matched the few details she had formed in her imagination. She took 1 step toward him. "Miss Porter." The voice came from her left. Not a question. A statement. She turned. The man standing there was nothing like the image she had built in her mind. He was tall, genuinely tall, the kind of height that didn't announce itself, but simply existed the way a mountain exists. Dark hair, a little long under the brim of a worn hat. Eyes the color of river water in the late afternoon gray-green, and difficult to read. A jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically to hold a hard expression. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, broad across the shoulders, and he was looking at her not with the polite interest of a man meeting his bride for the first time, but with something more careful than that. Something more measured. "I'm Miss Porter," she said. "And you are not Mr. Harrington." "No," he said. "I'm not." She waited. He didn't volunteer anything else immediately, and that small silence was enough to send the first thread of unease through her chest. "Is Mr. Harrington here?" she asked. The tall man glanced briefly across the platform toward the fair-haired man she had noticed earlier. Then he looked back at her, and his expression shifted by a fraction, not into sympathy exactly, but into something careful and deliberate, as though he was choosing his next words with the same attention a man gives to stepping across uncertain ground. "He is," the man said. "But there's something you need to know before you go over there, Miss Porter. Something he should have written to you himself and didn't." Annabelle's hand tightened on her traveling bag. "Tell me." "His sister arrived from Philadelphia 2 weeks ago. She's recently widowed herself and she has 2 children with her. Gerald decided he doesn't need a wife anymore. He's got family to run the household now." A pause. "He doesn't want you." There it was, 4 words, clean and flat as a blade. Annabelle heard them, she absorbed them. She felt the blood leave her face, and then come back very hot, and she stood perfectly still through all of it, because she had learned a long time ago that the worst thing a person can do in the moment of a blow is let it show. "I see," she said. "He should have written," the man said again. His voice carried something in it, not apology, because this wasn't his fault to apologize for, but a kind of rough honesty, the acknowledgement that a wrong had been done. "Yes," Annabelle said. "He should have." She looked across the platform. Gerald Harrington was still standing there with his arms crossed, still watching the train, and he had the expression of a man who was waiting for an unpleasant task to resolve itself without his direct involvement. He had not walked over. He had sent this stranger to deliver his news for him. The anger that moved through Annabelle in that moment was quiet and hot and total. She looked back at the tall man. "You still haven't told me your name." "Kieran Knox," he said. "I own the ranch neighboring Harrington's land." "And why did Gerald Harrington send you to tell me this instead of coming himself?" Something crossed Kieran Knox's face. It wasn't quite disgust, but it was in the same neighborhood. "He didn't send me," he said. "I came on my own. I was at the station picking up supplies when I saw the train come in. I knew you were arriving today." He paused. "I thought you deserved to hear it from someone who would at least have the decency to look you in the eye." Annabelle studied him for a long moment. She was very good at reading people. It was a skill she had developed over years of navigating Boston society, where half of everything said was designed to obscure the other half. Kieran Knox did not appear to be a man who spent much energy on concealment. What she saw in his face was uncomfortable, but simple. He thought the situation was wrong, and he had acted on that belief. "Thank you," she said quietly. And she meant it. Then she turned and walked across the platform toward Gerald Harrington. He saw her coming and unfolded his arms. Up close, he had a soft look about him, the look of a man who had lived comfortably and intended to keep doing so. He extended his hand. "Miss Porter, I trust you had a pleasant journey. I trust," she said, not taking his hand, "that you will return to me the full cost of my travel expenses as your advertisement promised." His expression flickered. "Of course. I've arranged a bank draft." "Today," she said. "I'd like it today." Another flicker. "I can have it to you by tomorrow morning." "Today, Mr. Harrington." Her voice was even, perfectly even. "You have already taken more from me than the price of a train ticket. You will not take one additional day." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. Gerald Harrington looked at this woman who had traveled 3 days on a train to marry him and found apparently that she was not the docile, grateful creature he had perhaps imagined. His jaw worked once, then he nodded. "I'll go to the bank now," he said. "I'll wait here," she said. He left. Annabelle stood on the platform with her traveling bag and her 2 trunks and the full wreckage of her plan laid out around her, and she breathed steadily in and out and thought about what came next. She had approximately $60 of her own money left. Enough for a week at a boarding house, maybe less in an unfamiliar town. She did not know a single soul in Silver Creek. She had given up her room in Boston, had no position to return to, and had spent the last of her social connections, exhausting every possibility before she had accepted the necessity of this arrangement. She was in the plainest possible terms stranded. "You handled that well." She turned. Kieran Knox had not left. He was standing a few feet away watching Gerald Harrington's retreating back with an expression she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said again. Then, because there was no point in pretending, "I'm in a difficult position." "I know," he said. "Is there a reputable boarding house in town?" "There is. Mrs. Calloway runs it on the main street. She's fair." He looked at her directly. "But a boarding house will eat through whatever Harrington gives you inside a week, and then you'll be looking at the train back east." Annabelle looked at him. "Is that a fact or a prelude to something?" The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something more restrained than that. "It's a prelude to something," he said. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Porter, and I want to be clear from the start that it is entirely your choice to refuse it." "Then say it plainly." "My ranch is short-handed," he said. "I lost my housekeeper last spring. She married a man from Denver and moved on. I need someone who can manage a household, cook, keep accounts, oversee the supply orders. You mentioned in your letters to Harrington, he told me something of it, that you have experience with household management and accounts." Annabelle blinked. "You discussed my letters with Gerald Harrington. He mentioned you were educated. I'm not apologizing for listening." His tone wasn't defensive. It was matter of fact. "The work is real and it's not easy. The pay is fair. You'd have your own room, your own privacy, and a wage that would let you save enough to go wherever you choose in 6 months. I'm not asking for anything beyond honest work. I want that to be clear." She looked at him for a long moment. The offer was either the most practical solution to an impossible situation, or it was something else entirely dressed up in practical language. She had enough experience with men to know that the language of reason was sometimes used to disguise entirely unreasonable intentions. But Kieran Knox met her eyes when he spoke, and he did not look away. And there was something in his directness that had the particular texture of honesty, not performed honesty, not strategic honesty, but the unself-conscious honesty of a man who simply didn't bother with anything else. 6 months, she said. 6 months, he confirmed. "Or less if you want to leave sooner. I won't hold you to any time that doesn't suit you. And if I find it's not what you've described, then you leave and I'll pay your train fare back east. My word on it." She should have asked for more time. She should have gone to Mrs. Calloway's boarding house, slept on it, made the decision with a clear head after a full night's rest. That was what a sensible person would have done. But the bank draft in her hand, which Gerald Harrington had returned with 20 minutes later, tight-lipped and avoiding her gaze, was not going to last her long. And the train back east would take everything she had left and deposit her back in Boston with nothing but the same closed doors she had left behind. "All right," she said. 6 months. And I want it in writing." Kieran Knox looked at her for a moment, and this time what moved across his face was something close to respect. "I'll have it written up today," he said. "You can read every word before you sign it." He helped her load her trunks into his wagon without being asked and without making a production of it. He didn't fill the silence with small talk. He drove in a quiet and efficient way, as though this were simply the next item on a list of things that needed doing, and Annabelle sat beside him and watched Silver Creek fall away behind them, and wondered what on earth she had just agreed to. The Knox Ranch came into view about 40 minutes from town. It was larger than she had expected. The house itself was solid and well built. Nothing fancy, but the kind of structure that had been put up by someone who intended it to last. There were 3 or 4 outbuildings visible, a large barn, and the sound of cattle somewhere beyond the rise. "How many men work the ranch?" she asked. 4 full-time hands, he said. "They keep to the bunkhouse. They won't bother you. And you live in the main house." "East wing," he said. "You'd have the west wing. Separate entrance if you want it." She nodded. He pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down and offered her his hand to help her down from the seat, which she accepted, because the step was genuinely steep, and not because she needed the gesture. His hand was rough from work and warm, and he released hers the moment she was steady on the ground. The first man she met was a young ranch hand named Cody, who couldn't have been more than 20, with a round open face and the kind of uncomplicated friendliness that Annabelle found unexpectedly steadying. He tipped his hat to her and said, "Welcome, ma'am," with genuine good cheer, and then looked at Kieran with barely concealed curiosity. "Miss Porter will be taking over the household," Kieran said to him. "Spread the word to the others. She's to be treated with the same respect you'd give any member of this operation. Clear." "Clear, boss," Cody said, and he meant it. They went inside. Kieran showed her the kitchen, the main room, the study where the accounts were kept. He showed her the west wing, a bedroom, a small sitting room, a door that locked from the inside. He showed her the pantry and the supply ledger, which was in better shape than she had expected, organized in a precise, clear hand that turned out to be his own. "You keep your own books," she said. "I keep my own everything," he said. It wasn't said with pride, it was just a fact. "The ledger is well organized." "I'll take that as a compliment." She looked at him. He was looking at the ledger. "It was meant as one," she said. He looked up then, and their eyes met for a moment that was slightly longer than it needed to be, and then they both looked away. That evening, Annabelle sat at the kitchen table with the written agreement Kieran had drafted and read every word twice. It was clear and fair and contained no hidden conditions. She signed it and he signed it, and they each kept a copy. Over a simple supper of beans and bread that she had assembled from what she found in the pantry, she had decided immediately that improving the food situation was a priority. He told her a few practical things about the ranch routine. What time the hands came in for meals, where the supply orders went, who to speak to in town about credit. He did not tell her anything about himself. She did not ask. But that night, lying in the West Wing bedroom, with the Colorado night pressing cold against the window, and the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her, Annabelle thought about what she had observed in Kieran Knox over the course of one extraordinary day. He was a man of his word. That much was already clear. He was efficient without being cold. He was direct without being unkind. He had come to the train station for no reason other than that it was the right thing to do, and he had made her an offer that gave her genuine options at a moment when she had almost none. She didn't trust that easily. Life had burned that tendency out of her, but she was honest enough lying there in the dark to admit that she was already paying attention to Kieran Knox in a way that had nothing to do with business. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes and told herself firmly that 6 months was 6 months, and that she was here to work, and that the particular quality of a man's voice when he said your name was not a sound that a sensible woman should spend time thinking about. Then she thought about it anyway, and somewhere across the wall of the ranch house in the east wing, that mirrored her own, a light burned late into the night. She didn't know that. She didn't know that Kieran Knox sat at his desk with the copy of their agreement in front of him and read it through a second time and a third, and that his jaw was set in the particular way it got when he was working to keep something at a careful distance. He had been very careful for a very long time. He had very specific reasons for that, and for the first time in years, those reasons felt slightly less convincing than they had the day before. The first morning told her everything she needed to know about what she had walked into. Annabelle was up before dawn, not because anyone asked her to be, but because lying in an unfamiliar bed listening to her own thoughts had become unbearable around 4 in the morning, and she had decided that motion was better than stillness. She dressed, found the kitchen, and started a fire in the stove. The pantry situation was worse than she had assessed the night before. There was flour salt pork, dried beans, coffee, and very little else. Whoever had been managing meals before her arrival had either given up weeks ago or had been working with a philosophy that food existed purely for survival and not for any other purpose. She found a half-empty sack of cornmeal behind a rusted tin, assessed it, decided it was usable, and started breakfast. By the time boots hit the floorboards in the east wing, she had coffee on cornbread in the iron pan and the salt pork sliced and frying. She heard the footsteps cross the main room and stop just outside the kitchen doorway. A pause. Then Kieran walked in. He was already dressed for the day, hat in hand, and he stopped when he saw the state of the kitchen, the fire going, the smell of real food in the air, and something moved across his face that he controlled almost immediately. "You didn't have to start this early," he said. "I was awake," she said. "Sit down. Coffee's ready." He sat. She poured. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at her over the rim with an expression she was already beginning to recognize, that careful measuring look that wasn't unfriendly but wasn't quite open either. The look of a man who had learned to take stock before he committed to anything. "You went through the pantry," he said. "I did. It needs restocking, significantly." She set a plate in front of him. "I'll need a list of what you normally order and the name of the supplier in town." "Harlan's Dry Goods. I'll write you a note of credit." He looked at the plate. Then he looked up at her. "Miss Porter." "Annabelle," she said without quite planning to. He looked at her for a moment. "Annabelle," he said. "This is more than I've eaten for breakfast in 6 months." "That explains a great deal," she said. The corner of his mouth moved in that not-quite smile. He ate. She poured herself coffee and stood at the counter and made a mental list of everything that needed doing, and the kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the fire and the distant noise of the hands stirring in the bunkhouse, and it was the most almost comfortable silence she had experienced in a very long time. Then Cody burst through the back door with the particular energy of a young man who has forgotten that other people exist. He stopped dead when he saw Annabelle remembered his manners and yanked his hat off. "Morning, ma'am. Morning, boss." He looked at the pan on the stove. His whole face changed. "Is that cornbread?" "It is," Annabelle said. "Sit down." He sat down so fast, the chair scraped. Kieran watched this with an expression that on a less contained man might have been amusement. The other 3 hands came in over the next 10 minutes, each one stopping in the doorway with the same look of faint disbelief, like men who had been expecting rain and got sunshine instead. Their names were Pete Darnell and a weathered older man everyone called Swede, who had apparently been with the Knox Ranch for 11 years and regarded the entire enterprise with the quiet authority of someone who had outlasted every problem it had ever produced. Swede looked at the food. He looked at Annabelle. He looked at Kieran. "About time," he said, and sat down. Kieran caught Annabelle's eye across the table. This time the corner of his mouth went all the way. It was the first time she had seen him actually close to smiling. She turned back to the stove before it could mean anything. The morning was full. She found the household account book in the study and spent an hour going through it, cross-referencing with the supply ledger. The numbers were functional, but loose in places, not dishonest. Just the work of a man who ran a ranch primarily in his head and committed things to paper as an afterthought. She made notes. She found 3 supplier invoices that had been paid twice by accident. $22 total, sitting uncollected. She brought them to Kieran at noon, when he came in from the south pasture, dusty and direct, pulling his gloves off as he walked. "These were double paid," she said, holding out the invoices. "You can reclaim $22 from Harlan's and another $8 from the feed supplier on Birch Street." He stopped, looked at the invoices, looked at her. "You found those in one morning?" The ledger wasn't difficult to read. It just needed someone to read it. He took the invoices slowly. "That's $30, he said. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment with that measuring quality intensified, and she had the distinct impression that she had just passed some kind of test that she hadn't known she was taking. "I'll ride into town tomorrow," he said. "I'd like to come," she said. "The pantry situation is urgent, and I'd rather select the supplies myself." "All right," he said, just like that. No negotiation, no question. All right. She was not accustomed to being agreed with that easily. The afternoon brought the first real trouble. She was in the kitchen working through the inventory when she heard raised voices from outside. Not the ordinary noise of working men, something sharper than that. She moved to the window without thinking about it. In the yard, Cody was facing a man she didn't recognize. The stranger was older, thick through the chest, sitting on a horse, with the particular ease of someone who spent his whole life on horseback. He had two men behind him, and none of the three of them had the look of people who had come to discuss anything pleasantly. Cody's voice came through clearly. "Mr. Voss, the boss said the water rights on that creek are settled by deed. There's nothing to discuss." Voss. The name landed in Annabelle's chest with a small, cold weight, though she couldn't have said why. "Boy," the man on the horse said in a voice like gravel rolling in a tin, "you go tell your boss that settled by deed and settled by fact are two different things out here." Annabelle walked to the door and stepped out onto the porch. All three men on horseback looked at her. Cody looked at her with a flash of something between relief and alarm. "Ma'am," Cody said carefully, "you should probably—" "I heard the conversation from inside," she said pleasantly. She looked at Voss directly. "I'm afraid Mr. Knox isn't on the property at this moment. If you'd like to leave your name and the nature of your business, I'll make sure he receives the message when he returns." Voss looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were the flat, pale color of bad weather. "Who are you?" he said. "Annabelle Porter," she said. "I manage the household accounts and the correspondence." She held his gaze steadily. "Your name, sir?" The pause that followed was the kind that had edges on it. Voss looked at her, at this woman standing on the porch of the Knox ranch, with her chin level and her hands still, and her expression so utterly composed that it gave him nowhere to go, and something shifted in his face that wasn't respect exactly, but was in the same family as caution. "Wade Voss," he said. "I own the Double V Ranch to the north. Tell Knox I'll be back." "I'll tell him," she said. "Good afternoon, Mr. Voss." He turned his horse and rode out. His two men followed. Cody let out a breath that had been stored somewhere in his boots. "Ma'am," he said, turning to look at her. Mr. Voss doesn't usually—" He stopped. "Most people don't look at him like that." "Like what?" she said. "Like he's not particularly impressive," Cody said. She almost smiled. "He's not," she said, and went back inside. Kieran came in 2 hours later to find her at the kitchen table writing out the supply order in her clear, efficient hand. She relayed the encounter with Voss in the same tone she might have used to report the weather facts, no embellishment, nothing left out. When she finished, there was a silence. "He came here personally," Kieran said. "With two men behind him," she said. "Yes." "And you went out to the porch. Cody is 20 years old, and Voss was pushing him. He could have been dangerous." "He was," she said. "He just decided not to be." She looked up at him. "Is this water rights dispute something I should know more about?" The shift in Kieran's expression was subtle, but total. It was like watching a door close, not slammed, just quietly and deliberately pulled shut. "It's a long story," he said. "I have time." He sat down across from her. He was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands, in a slow rotation that she recognized as the gesture of a man organizing what he was willing to say versus what he intended to keep. "Voss has been trying to acquire land in this valley for 4 years, he said finally. "He's bought out 3 smaller ranches. He wants access to Garrison Creek because it cuts through the northern edge of my land and feeds into his property in summer. Without it, his northern pastures go dry by August. And the deed specifies your rights clearly." "The deed specifies my rights clearly," he said. "But Voss has a lawyer in Denver and a judge in the county seat who drinks at his table on a regular basis." Annabelle set down her pen. "How serious is this?" Kieran looked at her directly. "Serious enough that my last housekeeper left partly because her husband didn't want her working for someone who might have a legal fight coming." The room was very quiet. "You didn't mention that when you offered me the position," she said. "No," he said. "I didn't." She held his gaze. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because you went out to that porch this afternoon," he said. "And you deserve to know what you're in the middle of." It was, she thought, the most honest thing a man had said to her in years. Not comfortable, not reassuring, just honest. "All right," she said. She picked up her pen. Then I suggest we make sure every document related to the deed and the water rights is organized and accessible. If this goes to a legal challenge, you'll want to produce records quickly." She looked at him. "Where are the original deed papers?" He stared at her for a moment. Then he stood and went to the study. She heard a drawer open. He came back with a leather folder and set it on the table. "You're not going to ask me to be careful," she said. "I just watched you face down Wade Voss," he said. "I think you know how to be careful." She opened the folder and started reading. They worked side by side at the kitchen table until the light outside went from gold to gray, and the thing that struck Annabelle as she turned pages and made notes was how natural it was. How completely and surprisingly natural. Kieran answered her questions without impatience. He tracked the conversation with a quick intelligence that he wore lightly without display, and she kept recalibrating her understanding of him, and finding that each new calibration required moving the estimate upward. He was not what she had expected. He was not what she would have designed if she were inventing a man to fit a specific need. He was something more specific and more inconvenient than that. He was interesting. She drove that thought firmly from her mind and focused on the deed. Dinner that night was a proper meal for the first time, salt pork with gravy beans, cooked with onion that she had found dried in the back of the pantry, and the last of the cornbread. The hands ate with the concentrated silence of men who are genuinely grateful and don't know exactly how to say so. Swede looked at his plate, then at her and said, "You staying past 6 months?" "We'll see," she said. Said Swede, which she was beginning to understand was his version of a full sentence. Kieran said nothing, but she was aware of him hearing the exchange. That night she lay in the dark again, but the thoughts were different. Less afraid than they had been the night before. The situation was still uncertain. The Voss problem was real, and the question of what she was building here and whether it had a future was still entirely open. But there was something underneath the uncertainty now that hadn't been there before. Something that felt against all reasonable expectation, like ground. She did not name it. She was too careful for that. But she felt it. Across the wall, the light in the east wing stayed on again, and this time, Kieran Knox was not sitting at his desk looking at papers. He was sitting at his desk, looking at nothing in particular, thinking about a woman who had walked out onto the porch to face Wade Voss without hesitating, and had then sat down at his kitchen table and started organizing his legal documents, as if that were simply the next logical thing to do. He had lived alone for 6 years. Not by accident, by design. He had built the solitude around himself the way a man builds a fence with intention and effort and the specific purpose of keeping certain things out. He knew the dimensions of his own loneliness, and he had made his peace with it because the alternative had cost him more than he had been willing to pay a second time. He was now for the first time in 6 years aware of the fence, and for the first time in 6 years he was not entirely sure he wanted it where it was. 3 days passed, then 4. Annabelle went to town with Kieran as planned and navigated Harlan's dry goods with the focused efficiency of someone who had managed a household budget under genuine pressure and knew the difference between necessary and comfortable. The pantry was transformed in a single afternoon. Harlan himself, a compact, red-cheeked man who seemed mildly astonished to be dealing with a woman who could read a supply invoice faster than he could write. One watched her move through his store with an expression that was equal parts appreciation and slight alarm. In the street outside, 3 women stopped to look at her with the assessing quality, particular to small towns, where a new face is simultaneously a curiosity and a threat to established order. One of them, a handsome woman in a good wool dress, who carried herself with the specific confidence of someone who knew exactly how she fit into the hierarchy of a place, caught Annabelle's eye and held it for a moment before turning away. "Who is that?" Annabelle asked Kieran quietly as they loaded the wagon. He followed her glance, something in his jaw tightened by a degree. "Clara Weston," he said. "Her father owns the Weston lumber operation east of town." There was something in the way he said it. A flatness. The particular flatness of a subject that has been deliberately compressed. "She looked at you," Annabelle observed. "People look," he said, and lifted another crate onto the wagon. She did not pursue it, but she filed it away. She was very good at filing things away. The next morning, Clara Weston came to the ranch. Annabelle was in the study, organizing the deed folder, when she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Then Cody's voice, then a woman's voice, smooth assured with the confidence of someone who did not expect to be turned away. She came out to the main room as Kieran came in from outside. Clara Weston was standing in the doorway of the ranch house, framed in morning light, wearing a riding habit that fit her extremely well. She was perhaps 30, dark-haired and beautiful, in a cool, deliberate way. Her eyes moved from Kieran to Annabelle and back to Kieran. "Kieran," she said. Her voice was warm, but her eyes were doing something entirely different. "I heard you had a new housekeeping arrangement." Her gaze moved to Annabelle. "You must be Miss Porter." "I am," Annabelle said. "Clara Weston." She offered her hand and Annabelle shook it, and they were polite to each other with the focused precision of two people who understand that politeness is currently doing a great deal of work. "I came to speak with Kieran about the county water board meeting," Clara said, redirecting to him. "My father thinks you should have representation there. Voss is bringing his lawyer." "I know," Kieran said. "The meeting is in 8 days." She paused. "Father would like you to come to dinner this week. Discuss strategy." "I appreciate that," he said. She looked at him steadily for a moment. "It would be good to see you," she said. Just that. Nothing more overtly stated. But the statement under the statement was perfectly clear. Annabelle kept her face entirely neutral. She was an expert at keeping her face entirely neutral. After Clara Weston left, the kitchen was very quiet. "She's in love with you," Annabelle said. Kieran turned from the window. "That's—" He stopped. "She's been in love with you for some time." Annabelle continued in a tone she might have used to observe that the weather looked like rain. "And she came here to see what I am." He was quiet for a moment. "Clara and I have known each other for years," he said carefully. "That's not what I said." Another pause. "No," he said. "It's not." He looked at her directly. "Is that a problem for you?" It was not the question she had expected. She had expected a deflection, a redirect, not a direct question aimed straight at her. She met his gaze. "No," she said equally directly. "Is it a problem for you?" The silence that followed had a quality to it she couldn't quite name. Something that was still and charged at the same time, the way air feels before a storm. "I need to get back to the south pasture," he said. "Of course," she said. He left. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and was honest with herself for exactly 15 seconds about what was happening in her chest, and then she put it firmly away and went back to the deed folder. She was here for 6 months. She was here to work. She repeated that to herself until she almost believed it, and outside, Kieran Knox walked to the barn with his jaw set and his chest tight, and the full awareness that the fence he had built so carefully over 6 years had in the space of 5 days developed a door it had never had before. He didn't know yet whether that was a disaster or the best thing that had happened to him in years. He suspected with a certainty that settled in his bones rather than his head that it might be both. The water board meeting was 8 days away, and Annabelle had not slept properly in 3 of them. Not because of fear. She had made her peace with the Voss situation in the same way she made her peace with most hard things, by understanding it clearly and then deciding what to do about it. What kept her awake was something she found considerably more difficult to manage than a land dispute with a bully who owned a judge. It was the way Kieran Knox moved through his own house, not with any particular drama. That was the problem. He was simply present in the way that solid things are present reliably without performance, in a way that you stopped noticing until it was gone, at which point you noticed nothing else. He came in from the pasture at the same time each evening. He said what he meant. He ate what she cooked without comment, except once when she had made a proper beef stew with the supplies from town, and he had looked at the bowl and then looked at her and said quietly, "This is the best thing I've eaten in 2 years," and gone back to eating. She had turned back to the stove and stood there for a moment longer than necessary. The fourth morning she was in the study going through the deed folder again when she found something that stopped her cold. It was a letter, not part of the legal documents. It had been tucked into the back of the folder, folded twice with no envelope. She would not have opened it. She was not in the business of reading other people's private correspondence, except that it had unfolded as she lifted it, and the first line was already visible before she could stop herself. Kieran. The letter read in a woman's handwriting. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I need you to know that leaving had nothing to do with you and everything to do with me. You deserved better than what I was able to give. I'm sorry. She folded it immediately and put it back exactly where she had found it. She sat at the desk for a long moment, her hands, still her mind very quiet. She didn't know who had written it. She didn't know when. But she understood now with sudden clarity the quality she had been trying to name in Kieran Knox since the first day, that particular combination of self-sufficiency and sealed-off stillness, the way he occupied his own life like a man who had learned to need very little because needing things had cost him too much. Someone had left him, and he had built the whole architecture of his solitude around that fact. She put the folder back in order and went to make breakfast and said nothing. But the knowledge sat inside her chest, quiet and careful, changing the shape of everything she thought she understood. Kieran came in from the early morning check of the north fence and stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her. Something in her stillness must have registered, because his expression sharpened slightly. "You all right?" he said. "Fine," she said. "Eggs are almost ready." He watched her for a moment more than usual. Then he sat down. They ate in the ordinary silence of the morning, and it was the same as every other morning, and nothing had changed at all. Except that it had. The trouble came before noon. Cody rode in hard from the north pasture. His horse lathered his face, flushed with something between anger and alarm. He was off the horse before it fully stopped and came into the barn where Kieran was working on a harness repair. Annabelle was crossing the yard with the empty supply basket and heard it clearly. "Boss, Garrison Creek. Someone's put up a new fence line overnight 20 yards onto our side of the property marker. There's a Voss man sitting on a horse on the other side of it like he's been there all morning waiting for someone to notice." The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. "Which men are out right now?" Kieran said. "Pete and Darnell are at the south water tank. Swede's in the east pasture." "Ride and get Swede. Tell Pete and Darnell to stay where they are." Kieran came out of the barn with his jaw set in the way Annabelle had learned, meant that he had already decided what he was going to do and was simply implementing it. He looked at her. "Stay here." "What are you going to do?" she said. "Go look at the fence." "Alone. With Cody when he gets back with Swede." He was already moving toward the horses. "Kieran." Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him. He turned. "Don't do anything that gives Voss's lawyer a story to tell," she said. "Whatever you do out there, don't give them a reason to paint you as the problem." He looked at her for a moment. The muscle in his jaw worked once. Then he nodded, short and precise. "I know," he said. "I know you know. I'm saying it anyway." Something in his expression shifted. "Stay here," he said again, but the tone was different this time. Less order, more something else. He rode out. She did not stay. She went to the study, pulled out the deed folder, found the original survey record, and read the property line description for the north boundary 3 times until she had every landmark memorized. Then she found Kieran's hand-drawn pasture map pinned to the inside of the back cover and traced the Garrison Creek boundary with her finger. The property line was marked by a series of survey stakes installed in 1873. She copied the relevant measurements onto a separate sheet of paper in her clear hand, folded it, and put it in her apron pocket. Kieran came back 2 hours later. He came in through the kitchen and sat down at the table with the look of a man who has been very controlled for a sustained period and is now allowing himself to briefly stop being controlled. "Tell me," she said. "Voss put the fence up overnight, 22 yards inside my property line according to the original stakes. His man wouldn't speak to me directly, just said the fence was placed on Voss's land, and that any questions should be directed to his lawyer." Kieran's voice was level. His hands on the table were not entirely. Swede says 2 of the original survey stakes have been pulled. Annabelle absorbed this. Pulled, she said. Not moved. Removed entirely. That's deliberate destruction of surveyed boundary markers, she said. That's a legal matter, not just a land dispute. She pulled the folded paper from her apron pocket and set it in front of him. I copied the original measurements from your 1873 survey record. If you have the deed registered with the county, this should be sufficient to establish the original line even without the physical stakes. He stared at the paper. Then he looked at her. I went through the deed folder this morning, she said, carefully neutral, watching his face. His expression told her that he understood exactly what she meant. A brief stillness crossed his face, private contained, and then it was gone. I keep the county registration certificate in the strongbox, he said. Then I'd get it out today, she said. And I'd ride to the county land office in person before Voss's lawyer does. File a formal notice of encroachment. She met his eyes. First to file sets the narrative. Kieran looked at her for a long moment with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. It was somewhere between astonishment and something more complicated. Where did you learn that? He said. My husband was an attorney, she said. I read everything in his office. A pause. I had a lot of time alone in that office toward the end. The word end sat between them. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. But something passed between them in that silence that was more honest than a full explanation would have been. I'll ride to the county seat tomorrow morning, he said. Take the original deed, the survey record, and the certificate, she said, and write down every detail of what you saw today before you sleep tonight while it's exact in your mind. Date it and sign it. Annabelle. What? Thank you, he said. And it wasn't the polite thanks of a man being courteous. It was the direct thanks of a man who means it in the specific and unglamorous way of someone whose life has just been made meaningfully easier. She felt it land somewhere that she had been trying to keep well defended. Dinner's at 6, she said, and went back to the kitchen. That evening, after the hands had eaten and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Kieran came and sat in the kitchen again while she was cleaning up. He didn't have papers. He wasn't there for any stated purpose. He simply sat with a mug of coffee, and after a moment he started talking. Not about the ranch, not about Voss. He talked about Colorado in the early days, before Silver Creek had its current shape, when the land was rawer and the winters hit harder. He talked about building the first section of the ranch house with 2 hired men and a lot of mistakes. He talked about a horse he'd had for 12 years who had died the previous winter, and the way he'd said it plain and direct with the unsentimental grief of someone who has long experience with loss made Annabelle's throat tighten unexpectedly. She told him about Boston, about the boarding house, about the sewing work and the cold room, and the way pride becomes a thing you have to weigh against survival, and survival generally wins. He listened the way he did most things, with his full attention, without interrupting, without offering comfort she hadn't asked for. Just listening. You were alone for 2 years, he said. Yes. That's a long time. It was, she said. You've been alone for 6. He was quiet for a moment. You've been counting. You mentioned your housekeeper left last spring, and that was already a year after you'd been managing alone. Swede's been here 11 years. It's not difficult arithmetic. His mouth curved. No, he said. I suppose not. She looked at her hands wrapped around her own mug. Were you married? She asked. Carefully. The quiet that came was not the closed-door quiet she had expected. It was softer than that, more tired. Engaged, he said. 7 years ago. She left about 4 months before the wedding. He turned his mug in a slow circle on the table. She said the ranch was too hard, that she hadn't understood what the life actually meant until she was standing inside it. He paused. She wasn't wrong. I don't hold it against her. But it changed you, Annabelle said. Everything changes you, he said. That particular thing changed me a specific way. She understood that completely. She said so. He looked at her. Thomas, he said. Your husband. Was it a good marriage? Mostly, she said. He was a good man. He kept things from me that I should have known the trouble with his practice. But I think he kept them because he was afraid of looking like a failure, not to be cruel." She paused. Men sometimes confuse protecting someone with being honest with them. Kieran held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "They do." The fire had burned low. The hour was late. Neither of them moved to end the conversation. "You should know," he said finally in a quieter register, "that I didn't offer you this position because I needed a housekeeper." Annabelle went very still. I did need one," he said. "That was true. But when I saw you step off that train and Harrington's man hadn't even come to meet you when I understood what he'd done, I was angry." He said the words simply without drama. "Not on principle, specifically, for you. A woman who'd sold everything and traveled 3 days in good faith, and he couldn't be bothered to write a letter." He paused. "I wanted to give you an option that wasn't humiliation." She looked at him for a long moment. "And now," she said. "Now," he said, "I'm glad you're here, for reasons that have nothing to do with the accounts or the pantry." The kitchen was very quiet. "Kieran," she said. "I'm not asking anything," he said immediately. "I want to be clear about that. The agreement stands exactly as it was written. I thought you deserved to know that's not the whole of it, from my side." She looked at the table, then at him. "It's not the whole of it from my side either," she said. "And that scares me considerably." "Me too," he said. They sat with that for a moment, the mutual and honest admission of fear, which is a far more intimate thing than most declarations of feeling. Then Cody shouted from outside. Both of them were on their feet before the second shout finished. Kieran was through the door first. Annabelle a step behind him. Cody was in the yard pointing north, and in the dark sky above the ridgeline, there was an orange glow that had no business being there. Fire. "North pasture," Swede said, appearing from the bunkhouse with his boots only half on. "Grass fire by the looks of it. Wind's coming from the west." Kieran was already moving. "Cody, get the water barrels from the barn. Pete Darnell wet sacks now. Swede ride the east line and make sure it hasn't jumped." Annabelle ran back into the kitchen and came out with the 2 largest pots she had already heading for the water pump. Nobody told her to. Nobody told her not to. She worked the pump handle and filled the first pot and had it out to Cody before he had the second barrel loaded, and she did not stop moving for the next 2 hours. The fire was grass, not the barn, and the wind did not cooperate, but it also did not get worse. By midnight, the line was contained. By 1 in the morning, it was out. The men stood in the yard with blackened faces and burned hands and the particular exhausted quiet of people who have just narrowly won something. Kieran turned from the scorched line and walked back to where Annabelle was standing. He looked at her, her ruined apron, her burned hand, where a spark had caught her wrist, her face dirty from smoke. "You burned your hand," he said. "It's minor," she said. "Let me see it." She held it out. He took it in both of his and turned it toward the lantern light, and his face in that light was something she would remember for a very long time, that particular expression of a man who is holding something carefully because he is afraid of what he might do if he isn't careful. "It needs to be wrapped," he said. "I know how to wrap a burn," she said. "I know you do." He didn't let go of her hand. "Annabelle." "Kieran, that fire didn't start itself," he said quietly enough that only she could hear. "Grass doesn't catch like that on a still night in October unless someone helps it." She looked at him. The implication moved through her like cold water. "Voss," she said. "I can't prove it," he said. "Not yet." "Then we get proof," she said. He looked at her hand, still in his. Then he looked at her face. And something in him, something that had been held in careful suspension for 6 years, behind a fence he had built with intention and grief, and the specific discipline of a man who had decided that certain things were no longer available to him, shifted. Not broke, not collapsed. Simply moved, the way a door moves when someone finally turns the handle. "Yeah," he said. "We do." He still hadn't let go of her hand. She didn't pull it away. Behind them, Swede watched this from the doorway of the bunkhouse with the expression of a man who has been waiting for something for a long time and is now watching it finally arrive. He said nothing. He went inside. He allowed himself in the privacy of his bunk a small and satisfied sound. About time, he thought, for the second time in 10 days, and this time he meant it considerably more. He let go of her hand eventually, but not immediately. And that small fact, the not immediately, was the thing Annabelle carried with her into the next morning, turning it over quietly in her mind, the way you turn over something you've found and aren't yet sure whether it's precious or dangerous. She wrapped her own burn before dawn. She was up before anyone else the way she always was, and she stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and looked at the black line on the north ridge where the grass had burned and thought about Voss and about proof and about the way Kieran Knox had said her name in the dark with the fire still smoldering behind them. Two separate problems. She was determined to keep them separate. She was not entirely succeeding. Kieran left for the county seat before sunrise. He took the deed, the survey record, the registration certificate, and the written account he had made the night before, dated and signed in his clear hand. He told her he would be back by evening. He said it the way he said most things, directly, without decoration, but he paused at the door and looked at her hand. "How is it?" he said. "Fine," she said. "Go file your notice." Something in his face almost smiled. He went. By mid-morning, she had already dealt with two things she hadn't expected. The first was a visitor. Gerald Harrington arrived at the Knox Ranch at 9:30, with the particular manner of a man who has convinced himself that an awkward errand is actually a generous one. He was alone, riding a good horse, wearing a coat that cost more than most men in Silver Creek earned in a month. He tied up in the yard and found Annabelle hanging the morning laundry because the ranch still required laundry, regardless of land disputes and complicated feelings. He stood there a moment. She looked at him. "Miss Porter," he said, "I heard about the fire." "Word travels fast," she said, and went back to the laundry. "I wanted to make sure you were that everything was—" He stopped, tried again. "I owe you an apology." She turned and looked at him fully. "Yes," she said. "You do." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I should have written. I know that. My sister's arrival was unexpected and I made a decision quickly and I handled the communication poorly. You sent a stranger to tell me I wasn't wanted," she said. "At a train station. After I had sold everything I owned to honor an agreement you made and then discarded." Gerald Harrington's jaw worked. He was not accustomed to being spoken to this directly by a woman. She could see him deciding whether to be offended and then watching him decide against it, because her accuracy made offense difficult to sustain. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what I did. And it was wrong." She regarded him for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Apology noted," she said. "Was there something else?" He hesitated. "There are rumors in town," he said, "about you and Knox." The laundry line went very still. "What kind of rumors?" she said. Her voice was level, perfectly level. "That the arrangement is—" He cleared his throat. "People talk, Miss Porter, a woman living on a man's ranch. People draw conclusions." She looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Harrington," she said, "the only reason my reputation is in a position to be discussed is because of the decision you made 3 weeks ago. I'd recommend thinking carefully before you involve yourself further in the consequences of your own choices." She picked up the laundry basket. "Good day." He left. She went inside and set the basket down and stood at the sink with her hands braced on the counter and breathed through the anger until it became manageable. Rumors. Of course there were rumors. She had known there would be. She had known it from the first day and had decided it was a price she was willing to pay for the alternative, which was destitution. But knowing a thing was coming didn't make it land any softer. The second unexpected thing arrived an hour later, and it was worse. A rider she didn't recognize came to the front of the house and handed Cody an envelope addressed to Kieran Knox, marked urgent, from the county land office. Cody brought it to her because Kieran wasn't there, and she looked at the envelope and felt a specific kind of dread settle in her stomach. She didn't open it. It wasn't her mail to open. But when Kieran rode in at 5 that evening, dusty, tired, and with the expression of a man who has spent a day navigating bureaucracy and won some of it, she handed it to him the moment he came through the door. He looked at the return address, looked at her, opened it. She watched his face as he read. She was good at reading faces, but Kieran Knox kept his face well, and what she got was only the small indicators, the slight tightening around his eyes, the deliberate, controlled quality of his breathing. He finished. He set the letter on the table. Voss's lawyer filed a competing claim on the water rights yesterday morning, he said, before I got there. The kitchen was quiet. How? She said. You had the original deed. He filed an adverse possession claim, Kieran said. He's arguing that Voss has been using Garrison Creek for more than 10 years without formal objection, which under Colorado territorial law could establish a usage right. He paused. He has a signed statement from 3 men saying they witnessed Voss's cattle at the creek for the past decade. Signed statements from whose men? She said. Voss's men. She stared at him. That's legal, he said. Barely, but legal. He sat down. The hearing is in 6 days. 6 days. She ran the numbers in her head immediately. What was possible in 6 days? What couldn't be done? What would need to be prioritized? Who's your lawyer? She said. I don't have one. She stared at him again. Kieran? I've been handling the deed dispute myself. I know the documentation. You need a lawyer, she said. Today, not tomorrow. Today. The only lawyer in Silver Creek is Aldous Webb, and Webb plays cards with Voss every Thursday. She felt the specific frustration of a situation that was designed to have no clean exit. She breathed through it. Is there anyone in the county seat you trust? There's a man named Fletcher, Robert Fletcher. He handled the original deed registration. He's honest. Kieran paused. He's also expensive. How expensive? He told her. She did not flinch, but it was a number that required a fast recalculation of several things. Can the ranch carry it? Barely. Then send a rider to Fletcher tonight, she said. Don't wait until morning. If Voss's lawyer is moving this fast, every hour matters. Kieran looked at her across the table. You're the one who should have been a lawyer, he said. My husband's debts were partly due to a legal dispute he mishandled, she said. I learned from his mistakes. She held his gaze. Send the rider tonight, Kieran. He sent Cody within the hour. That night was not quiet. Swede came in from the east pasture at 7 with news that 2 more survey stakes had been located, not removed, but moved. Relocated 8 inches, enough to shift the apparent line. Swede had marked the original positions with cairns of stones the size of his fist, before reporting in which Annabelle thought was exactly the right instinct. Swede, she said, can you draw what you saw? The positions, the stones, the distances. Swede looked at her with the unimpressed assessment of a man who did not draw things. I can draw it, Cody said, appearing from behind Swede with the eagerness of someone who has been waiting to be useful. Draw it precisely, she said. Every measurement you can estimate. Date it and have Swede sign it as witness. Yes, ma'am, said Cody. Yes, ma'am, said Swede with a tone that conveyed both compliance and the opinion that this was an extraordinary amount of paperwork for a cattle ranch. She spent the next 2 hours sitting with Kieran at the kitchen table, building a written timeline. Every incident since Voss's first visit to the ranch. Every date, every witness, every detail. She wrote it in her clear hand and read it back to him, sentence by sentence, and corrected 3 dates he had slightly wrong. How do you remember all of this? He said. I wrote it in the account book as it happened, she said. I do that. He looked at her. Since when? Since the first day Voss came to the yard, she said. I had a feeling records would matter. The expression on his face in that moment was something she couldn't name and wouldn't try. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers briefly, and then pulled it back, and neither of them said anything about it, and the timeline continued. At 10 that night, Robert Fletcher arrived. Not the next morning. That night. He had ridden 4 hours from the county seat after Cody reached him, because, as he explained, putting down his hat and accepting the coffee Annabelle put in front of him, he had been waiting for someone to file against Voss for 3 years, and he was not going to miss the opportunity by being slow about it. Fletcher was 60, compact, with a white beard and eyes that processed information with the speed and selectivity of a man who had spent 40 years distinguishing between what mattered and what didn't. He read the deed. He read the survey record. He read the timeline Annabelle had written. He looked at Cody's drawing of the moved stakes with Swede's witness signature. He set it all down. He looked at Kieran. "This is a strong case," he said. "Voss's adverse possession argument is weak because Knox has actively managed this property and has records of formal registration. The issue is the judge." He paused. "Judge Carver presides over water disputes in this county." "Carver drinks at Voss's table," Kieran said. "Carver does considerably more than drink at Voss's table," Fletcher said, "which is something I have been waiting for an occasion to demonstrate in a courtroom." He picked up the timeline again. "Who wrote this?" "I did," Annabelle said. Fletcher looked at her. "You witnessed all of this." "I was present for the majority of it. The rest I recorded from direct accounts given to me within 24 hours of each incident." "Your name?" "Annabelle Porter." "You're the housekeeper." "I manage the household accounts and correspondence," she said. "Yes." Fletcher regarded her for a moment with the evaluating look of a lawyer assessing a potential witness. Then he nodded. "You may be the most useful person in this room, Miss Porter." He looked at Kieran. "She testifies." "I what?" said Annabelle. "At the hearing, as a witness to the incidents of encroachment and to the record-keeping practice that documents them." He set down the timeline. "A woman's testimony about documented household records is extremely difficult to dismiss. Voss's lawyer will have a hard time making a housekeeper's account books look like a conspiracy." Kieran looked at her. She looked at Fletcher. "What would I need to do?" she said. "Tell the truth," he said. "Precisely and without embellishment. Which, based on this document, appears to be exactly what you do naturally." She looked at Kieran. "It's your choice," he said immediately. "No one is asking you to." "I'll do it," she said. The word was out before she had fully decided which was how she knew it was the right one. Kieran held her gaze for a moment, and in his expression was something unguarded, something she didn't see often in him, a kind of undisguised gratitude that was personal in a way that the legal situation alone could not account for. Fletcher stayed the night in the ranch's spare room and was at the table with papers before Annabelle had the coffee started in the morning. The next 5 days were the most intense of Annabelle's life since the week after Thomas died. She and Fletcher worked through the mornings. Kieran rode the property with Fletcher in the afternoons to verify every point the lawyer would need to establish. Swede located 2 of the original survey stakes that had been removed and found them buried 10 yards off the fence line, which was evidence of deliberate tampering that Fletcher received with barely restrained satisfaction. "Someone buried them," Annabelle said when Swede came in with the report. "Voss's man," Swede said. "Watched him do it myself 3 nights ago." The kitchen went silent. "You watched it happen," Kieran said. "And you didn't." "I was going to mention it," Swede said with the absolute unflappable certainty of a man who operated on his own timeline and found other people's urgency faintly excessive. Fletcher looked at Swede. "You'll also be testifying," he said. Swede looked at the ceiling. "I don't talk much in public," he said. "You'll talk at this hearing," Fletcher said pleasantly, "or I will lose a great deal of respect for you as a man." Swede looked at him. "Fine," he said. Through all of it, something was shifting between Kieran and Annabelle that neither of them named and both of them felt. The long evenings at the kitchen table, the way he handed her papers without being asked for them, already knowing what she needed, the way she brought him coffee at exactly the moment he was reaching for it. Small things, Ordinary things. The kind of things that built quietly over days until the accumulation became impossible to ignore. On the fourth night before the hearing, she was alone in the study, reviewing her prepared testimony, when she heard him stop in the doorway. She looked up. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was different, not the crisis management voice of the past 5 days. Something quieter than that, something more exposed. She put down the papers. He came in and sat down across from her the same way he had that first evening at the kitchen table when the whole thing had started. He looked at his hands for a moment. "When this is over," he said, "the hearing the Voss situation, all of it, when it's settled." He looked up. "I don't want you to leave." She looked at him. "Not because of the accounts," he said. "Not because of the pantry, or the testimony, or any of the practical reasons. Those are all true, and they all matter, but they're not—" He stopped, tried again. "I have been alone for 6 years because I decided it was the safer thing. And I have been—" Another stop. "I have not been happy, Annabelle. I've been functional, and I've been fine. And I have built something here that works. And none of it has been what I would have chosen if I had been less afraid." She was very still. "I'm not less afraid now," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I am still exactly as afraid as I have been. But I am—" He met her eyes. "I am no longer willing to let that be the reason." The room was quiet enough that she could hear the fire in the stove. "Kieran," she said. "You don't have to say anything," he said immediately. "I'm not— Kieran?" Her voice was steady. "I came here on a train from Boston with $60 and 2 trunks and every door behind me closed. I was not looking for this. I was specifically not looking for this." She paused. "And I have been sitting in this house for 3 weeks, watching you be exactly the kind of man I had stopped believing existed. And I am—" She stopped, felt the truth of it move through her. "I am also afraid. And I am also done letting that be the reason." He looked at her for a long moment. The fire settled in the stove with a soft sound. Then someone knocked hard on the front door. Both of them came back to the present, like people surfacing from water. Kieran stood. The knock came again, urgent, not polite. He opened the door. It was one of the Weston ranch hands. Young, out of breath, with the look of a man who had ridden hard. "Mr. Knox, Miss Clara sent me. She says you need to know her father had a meeting with Voss last week. She wasn't supposed to know about it." He paused. "Voss offered Weston Lumber a contract, a big one, in exchange for Herbert Weston testifying at the water hearing that he's seen Voss's cattle at Garrison Creek." The cold that moved through the room was immediate and total. "Herbert Weston," Kieran said. His voice was flat. "He hasn't given an answer yet," the hand said. "Miss Clara says he's considering it. She thought you should know." Kieran thanked the man and closed the door and stood with his back to it. Annabelle looked at him. "If Weston testifies for Voss," she said carefully, "what does that do to the case?" "Weston has been in this valley for 20 years, Kieran said. "His word carries weight." He turned. His face was controlled, but barely. "If he testifies for Voss, Fletcher says it shifts the balance." "Then we need to talk to Clara Weston," she said. "Clara is not going to go against her father." "She already did," Annabelle said. "She sent that rider. She chose to warn you when she didn't have to." She held his gaze. "She's already made her choice, Kieran. We just need to give her a reason to act on it." He looked at her. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "We ride to the Weston Ranch, together." The word "together" sat between them in the particular way that certain words do when they mean more than their single surface meaning. When they carry the weight of everything that has just been said in a quiet study on a cold Colorado night, and everything that is still being carefully, tentatively, courageously built. "Together," he said. And this time when he looked at her, the fence was entirely gone. They rode to the Weston Ranch at first light. Annabelle had not slept. Not from fear this time, and not from the complicated arithmetic of her own feelings, which she had spent 4 weeks carefully not calculating. She hadn't slept, because her mind was running the hearing like a chess problem. Every move Voss's lawyer would make, every counter Fletcher could offer, every place the case was strong, and every place it was soft. Herbert Weston was the soft place. If he testified for Voss, the balance shifted. Fletcher had said it plainly, and Fletcher was not a man who exaggerated. She was on her horse before Kieran came out of the barn. He looked at her already mounted coat, buttoned her expression, the focused and undecorated expression of a woman with a plan, and something in his face did the thing it had been doing with increasing frequency over the past week. The almost smile that wasn't almost anymore. The open look that he had stopped trying to close. "You couldn't sleep either," he said. "I slept fine," she said. "Annabelle." "I slept adequately," she said. "Let's go." He mounted, and they rode, and the Colorado morning was cold and clear, and the kind of beautiful that didn't ask permission. And neither of them talked much for the first 20 minutes, because some silences between two people have moved past the point of needing to be filled. The Weston Ranch was larger than Knox's, more polished. The kind of operation where money had been spent on appearances as well as function. Herbert Weston was the kind of man who believed those two things were the same. A hand took their horses. Clara Weston came out before they reached the door. She looked at them, at Kieran, then at Annabelle, then at the fact of them arriving together, and something moved across her face that Annabelle watched carefully. It was not simple. Clara Weston was not a simple woman. There was pain in it briefly, and then something more disciplined than pain, and then a straightening of her shoulders that Annabelle recognized as the particular courage of a person choosing the right thing over the comfortable one. "He's inside," Clara said. "He's expecting you. I told him last night that I sent the rider." She paused. "He was not pleased." "Clara," Kieran said. His voice was quiet. "Thank you for the warning. For this." She looked at him for a moment. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "He's made up his mind. You'll need to unmake it." She looked at Annabelle directly, and it was the first time she had done so without the careful social performance from their first meeting. Just one woman looking at another. "He responds to logic more than feeling," she said. "Lead with the practical consequences, not the moral ones." "Thank you," Annabelle said. Clara nodded once and stepped aside. Herbert Weston was 65, broad silver-haired, and had the particular authority of a man who had been the most important person in most rooms for 30 years. He was standing when they came in, which was not an accident. He did not offer them seats immediately. He looked at Kieran. "I know why you're here." "Then we can skip the introduction," Kieran said. "Voss's offer is significant," Herbert said. "The lumber contract would employ 14 men from this valley. That's not nothing." "No," Kieran said. "It's not. And your water dispute is your own affair, Knox. I didn't create the problem between you and Voss." "No," Kieran said again. "You didn't." Herbert looked at him, slightly thrown by the absence of argument. He had prepared for a fight, and Kieran wasn't giving him one. He shifted his gaze to Annabelle. "And you're the Porter woman," he said. "I am," she said. "You're here to talk me out of testifying. I'm here to make sure you have complete information before you make your decision," she said pleasantly. "Whatever you decide after that is entirely your own choice." Herbert's eyes narrowed slightly. He recognized that construction, the lawyer's approach of making a person feel free while laying the ground carefully. "What information?" he said. "Voss's lawyer is filing on adverse possession," she said. "He's arguing 10 years of continuous water usage. He has 3 signed witness statements, all from Voss's own employees." She paused. "We have documented evidence that survey stakes were physically removed from the Knox property line and buried off-site. We have a witness who observed the burial. We have a timeline of incidents going back to Voss's first visit documented contemporaneously." She held Herbert's gaze. "We also have correspondence between Voss's lawyer and the county land office that Fletcher obtained yesterday, which shows the filing was coordinated with a meeting at Judge Carver's home. Herbert Weston went very still. "Judge Carver," she said, "has accepted hospitality from Voss on at least 4 documented occasions in the past 2 years. Fletcher intends to raise a conflict of interest motion before the hearing begins. If that motion succeeds, the case moves to a circuit judge." She paused. "A circuit judge who does not drink at Wade Voss's table." The room was quiet. "If Voss loses this case," she continued, "and the survey tampering is entered into evidence, there is a strong possibility of criminal charges for the destruction of registered boundary markers. Voss's lawyer will be aware of that risk. When men become aware of criminal exposure, they frequently revise their arrangements." She let that sit. "The lumber contract Voss offered you is worth a great deal today, Mr. Weston. It is worth considerably less if the man offering it is under criminal investigation. And a signed testimony given in support of a fraudulent claim by a man of your standing in this valley is the kind of thing that follows a reputation for a very long time." Herbert Weston stared at her. Kieran said nothing. He had understood instinctively on the ride over that this was Annabelle's conversation to have. Herbert looked at his daughter, who was standing near the door with her arms folded and her expression carefully neutral. "Did you know all of this?" he said. "I knew enough," Clara said. Herbert looked back at Annabelle. "You put all of this together yourself, with Mr. Fletcher," she said. "Yes." A long pause. Herbert Weston moved to the window and stood there with his back to them. Nobody spoke. Outside, 2 of his men were crossing the yard, and the morning was going on with complete indifference to the decision being made in this room. "I haven't given Voss my answer yet," Herbert said finally, still with his back to them. "I know," she said. Another pause. Then he turned. "Tell Fletcher I'll speak to him before the hearing," he said. "In private." Kieran looked at him. "About what?" "About what I know," Herbert said. "About Voss." Something moved in his face, a heaviness, the expression of a man releasing something he has held too long. "Not everything that man has done in this valley has involved Knox's land. I have stayed out of it because the cost of getting involved was high." He looked at Annabelle. "You made the cost of not getting involved higher." He picked up his coffee cup, looked at it, set it down. "Tell Fletcher, before the hearing." Annabelle looked at Kieran. Kieran looked at Herbert Weston. "I appreciate this," he said. "Don't appreciate it yet," Herbert said. "I'm an old man making a late decision. There may be consequences I haven't calculated." He looked at his daughter. "Clara knew I'd do the right thing eventually." "I did," Clara said quietly. "I just helped it along." They rode back to the ranch in the morning that had turned bright and sharp, and halfway home, Kieran pulled his horse to a stop. She stopped beside him. "That was extraordinary," he said. "It was just logic," she said. "Annabelle, you just walked into Herbert Weston's house and redirected a 65-year-old man who has been the authority in this valley for 3 decades. He's a practical man," she said. "Clara told us to lead with practical consequences. You led with practical consequences and then took the floor out from under him so cleanly he didn't know it was gone until he was already standing somewhere different." He looked at her directly. "I have never met anyone like you." She held his gaze. The morning was cold and still around them, and the horses were patient. "You have to stop saying things like that," she said. "We have a hearing in 4 days." "I know," he said. "I'll stop saying things like that after the hearing." "You won't," she said. "No," he agreed. "I won't." They rode home. Fletcher's reaction to the Herbert Weston development was the closest thing to visible excitement Annabelle had seen from him. He stood up from the kitchen table when they told him which for Fletcher constituted a display of significant emotion. "He'll speak to me before the hearing," Fletcher repeated. "His words exactly," Annabelle said. Fletcher sat back down. He picked up his pen. He looked at Kieran. "Your housekeeper just changed the trajectory of this case," he said. "I know," Kieran said. "You should probably keep her," Fletcher said in the tone of a man making a legal recommendation. "I intend to," Kieran said. And he didn't look at Annabelle when he said it, but he didn't have to. The 4 days before the hearing were the longest of Annabelle's recent memory, and also in a way, she would not have predicted some of the most alive she had felt in years. There was the work, the preparation, the documents, the repeated run-through of testimony that Fletcher conducted with the methodical persistence of a man who believed that excellence came from repetition. There was the practical machinery of the ranch continuing underneath all of it, because cattle did not pause for legal disputes, and the supply order still needed managing, and the hands still needed feeding. And there was Kieran, constant and present and no longer fenced, though he was still careful with her the way a person is careful with something they value, not tentative, not distant, but deliberate, intentional. He handed her coffee in the morning without asking how she took it, because he already knew. He came and sat near her in the evenings when the work was done, not with any agenda, just near. As if nearness itself had become something neither of them was willing to pretend they didn't want. 2 nights before the hearing, Swede told Cody in the bunkhouse that he had given the whole situation 1 year before there was a wedding, and Cody said 3 months, and Pete said he wasn't getting in the middle of this, and Darnell said 6 weeks, and won the informal consensus. None of them said this to Kieran or Annabelle. They were not foolish men. The morning of the hearing, Voss made his first mistake. He made it at 7 in the morning, 2 hours before the hearing was scheduled to begin, in the street outside the county courthouse. He was standing with his lawyer and 2 of his men when Annabelle arrived with Kieran and Fletcher, and he looked at her. This woman in her good gray dress, with the account book under her arm, and the measured composure of someone who had been preparing for this exact moment for 4 days, and he made the mistake of underestimating her out loud. "Knox," he said loudly enough to carry. "You brought your housekeeper to speak for you. That's what it's come to." The street was not empty. There were people on their way to the courthouse, ranchers, townspeople, the kind of witnesses that small communities produce simply by existing. They all heard it. They all looked. Annabelle did not break stride. She did not look at Voss. She said at a conversational volume that carried with complete clarity in the still morning air, "Mr. Fletcher, make note of the time and the statement for the record. We may find it useful to establish Mr. Voss's regard for the testimony of women before the hearing begins." Fletcher wrote in his notebook without looking up. "Already done," he said pleasantly. Voss's lawyer put a hand on Voss's arm. Voss shook it off, but he didn't say anything else. The courthouse filled quickly. Judge Carver was not on the bench. Fletcher's conflict of interest motion had been submitted the previous afternoon and had been granted by the circuit administrator before dawn, a development that Voss's lawyer had clearly not anticipated, because his face when the circuit judge entered carried the specific expression of a man recalculating everything he had planned. Circuit Judge Harold Marsh was 72 years old, had been riding the Colorado circuit for 20 years, and had the reputation of a man who had heard every possible legal argument at least 3 times, and was largely impervious to theater. He was exactly what they needed. The hearing ran 4 hours. Fletcher was precise, methodical, and merciless in the specific way of a lawyer who has been waiting for an opportunity and has prepared for it comprehensively. He entered the deed. He entered the survey record. He entered the timeline. He entered Cody's drawing and Swede's witness signature. He entered the photographs a man Fletcher had brought from the county seat, had documented the buried stakes still in their off-site location, and he entered the recovered stakes themselves, still bearing the original survey markings. Voss's lawyer challenged the timeline. Fletcher called Annabelle. She sat in the witness chair and answered every question in the clear, even voice of a woman who is telling the exact truth and knows it, and is not afraid of anyone in the room discovering that fact. The lawyer tried 3 times to rattle her, questioning her position at the ranch, questioning her relationship to the defendant, suggesting that her records were compiled retrospectively to support a legal position. She answered each challenge the same way. Precisely, with dates, with specifics, with the particular authority of someone who had written things down as they happened and could prove it. Judge Marsh watched her with the assessing attention of a man who has developed over decades a reliable sense for when a witness is telling the truth. Then Herbert Weston testified. He had spoken to Fletcher for 2 hours the evening before the hearing. What he said on the stand was not the testimony anyone in Voss's camp had expected. Herbert Weston described in the measured and specific language of a man choosing his words with the full weight of his reputation behind them 3 separate occasions on which Wade Voss had pressured neighboring landowners to abandon water rights. He described a conversation in which Voss had explicitly stated his intention to acquire Garrison Creek by one means or another. He described the lumber contract offer and the explicit connection Voss had made between the contract and Herbert's testimony. He was describing bribery. On the stand, in open court. The silence in the courtroom when Herbert finished was the kind that has texture. Voss's lawyer requested a recess. Judge Marsh denied it. Swede testified for 11 minutes in the flat, unhurried cadence of a man who spoke rarely and therefore chose every word with care. He described watching Voss's man bury the survey stakes. He gave the date, the approximate time, the exact location. He said he had marked the site because it seemed like something a person ought to mark. Judge Marsh looked at Swede for a long moment after he stepped down. "You're a careful man," the judge said. "Try to be," said Swede. Voss's 3 witness statements, when entered against the weight of everything Fletcher had built, had the look of exactly what they were. Signed documents from men who worked for the man whose case they were supporting, with no corroboration, no dates, no specifics. The judge deliberated for 45 minutes. Annabelle sat beside Kieran in the courthouse and did not speak and did not move, and kept her hands folded in her lap with a stillness that was not calm, but was the shape of calm, imposed over something considerably less settled. Beside her, Kieran was equally still. Their arms were touching from shoulder to elbow, the slight contact of 2 people sitting close on a wooden bench. Neither of them moved away from it. Fletcher came back in with the expression of a man who already knew the answer. Judge Marsh entered. The room stood. The room sat. The ruling was complete and unambiguous. Knox's deed and survey rights were upheld. Voss's adverse possession claim was dismissed. The destruction of registered boundary markers was referred to the county sheriff for criminal investigation. The question of judicial impropriety regarding Judge Carver was referred to the Territorial Oversight Committee, and Wade Voss, for the first time in 4 years of pressuring this valley with the confidence of a man who believed he had already bought every door he needed to walk through, had nowhere to go. He left the courthouse without speaking. His lawyer walked a step behind him with the expression of a man calculating how quickly he could return to Denver. Fletcher shook Kieran's hand. He shook Annabelle's hand and held it for a moment. "In 40 years of practice," he said, "I have had perhaps 6 clients who understood instinctively what documentation was worth. You are one of them." "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher," she said. "I expect to be kept informed of developments," he said with the particular smile of a man who means more than the surface of what he's saying. He picked up his hat and walked out into the Colorado afternoon. Cody let out a sound that was somewhere between a shout and a prayer. Even Pete smiled, which Annabelle had not yet seen him do. Swede stood with his hat in his hands and looked at the floor and said nothing, which for Swede was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Outside the courthouse, Clara Weston was waiting. She looked at Kieran. "My father did the right thing," she said. "He did," Kieran said. "It took courage." "It took Annabelle," Clara said, and she looked at her directly, honestly, with the particular clear-eyed regard of a woman who has made a peace with something and means to honor it. "She's good for this valley," Clara said, "and she's good for you." A pause. "Don't be slow about it." She walked to her horse and rode before Kieran could answer. He stood there for a moment. Then he looked at Annabelle. "She's right," he said. "About which part?" Annabelle said. "Both," he said. "All of it." They rode home in the late afternoon, the 5 of them, and the hands rode ahead and gave them space in the way that people who care about 2 people will give them space without making a performance of it. The land spread out around them in the long golden light of a Colorado autumn, and it was quiet except for the horses and the wind moving through the dry grass. "I want to ask you something," Kieran said. "Ask," she said. "You came here on a 6-month agreement," he said. "That agreement was about work, about an arrangement that gave you options." He was looking straight ahead, and his voice had the careful quality of a man saying something that matters very much and wants to say it right. "I don't want to ask you to stay for the same reasons I hired you. That's not what this is. What I want to ask is different. It's bigger than that, and it has nothing to do with the kitchen accounts or the supply ledger or anything practical at all." She waited. He pulled his horse to a stop and looked at her directly in the particular way that had become over weeks, over mornings and evenings and crises and small ordinary moments, one of the things she trusted most in the world. "Annabelle Porter," he said, "will you stay here? Not as my housekeeper, not as a practical arrangement, as my partner in this land and this life, because I am a better version of myself when you are in it, and because I do not want to go back to the man I was before you stepped off that train." The horses stood patient in the afternoon light. She thought about Boston, about the closed doors and the cold room and the borrowed periodical with the advertisement in the back pages. She thought about selling her mother's jewelry and her husband's books, and boarding a train into the absolute unknown, with nothing but 2 trunks and $60, and a stubbornness that had kept her alive when very little else had. She thought about a stranger who came to a train platform, not because anyone sent him, but because it was the right thing to do. Who offered her a choice when she had almost none. Who wrote an agreement with no hidden conditions and let her read every word. Who built his fence carefully and then slowly, against every instinct of self-protection, let her find the door. "Yes," she said, "just that." One word, clean and whole and without qualification. He reached across and took her hand and held it the way he had that night after the fire, carefully, as if it were something of specific and serious value, and this time he did not let go when the moment passed. They rode home together in the last of the light, and the Knox ranch came up over the rise the way it always did. Solid, functional, real, and Swede was already at the barn, and Cody was unsaddling his horse, and Pete and Darnell were moving toward the bunkhouse. And it was the ordinary end of an extraordinary day, and it was exactly what a life looked like when 2 people had stopped running from it. That evening after supper, after the hands had gone and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Kieran and Annabelle sat on the porch in the cold, clear dark, and he did not let go of her hand, and she did not pull it away, and the stars over Silver Creek were the same stars they had always been. "We should probably tell Mrs. Calloway in town," Annabelle said, "before she hears it from someone else." "Probably," he said. "And the supply order needs to go out by Thursday." "It does," he said. "And the south fence needs—" "Annabelle." "What?" "Let the south fence wait." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "All right," she said. "The south fence can wait." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he rested his cheek against her hair, and the night was very still and very cold and completely theirs. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for the thing they are owed. The easy path, the uncomplicated love, the future that arrives without cost. Annabelle Porter had never been one of those people. She had learned early that the things worth having were the things you chose in the hard moment, when every practical reason said, turn back, and something deeper and more honest said, go forward anyway. She had come to Colorado with almost nothing. She had found something that could not be advertised for and could not be arranged. She had found a man who meant what he said, and said what he meant, and had been waiting without knowing it for someone who would do the same. And Kieran Knox, who had built his solitude carefully and guarded it for 6 long years, had discovered that the right person doesn't breach a fence. They simply make you understand slowly and irrevocably that you built it in the wrong place. They had not started as a love story. They had started as a practical arrangement in a frontier town in 1878 between 2 people who had been hurt by the world and had decided against considerable evidence to trust it one more time. That was exactly what made it the truest kind.